Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Lit Happens with Adriel and Belle. Thank you guys for tuning in today. We're going to be getting into the focus for this episode, which is the conclusions of an essay. So if you've been listening to Adriel and I the last few weeks, you know that we've been doing parters. We've come to the end now of our analytical essay writing. We'll be doing the conclusion. Before we get to the conclusion, Adriel, I have a lit or quit for you today.
Sounds good.
It is staying after school for essay catch-up sessions. Is that lit? Does it make you want to quit?
That's definitely a hard quit for me.
Yep.
I think a quit, especially with like the way we can always have Google Docs and whatnot these days with our kids. I think the ability to work from home in your own time is important, but that does come with a little bit of a, I guess, warning as well. Make sure you're not spending too much time at home working through kids' essays and whatnot. So I often say like a time frame, give the kids a time frame and you can work from whenever. It's sort of like the study sessions for English as well. Whenever we have those study breaks in schools, I know English in particular, kids sort of expect those to be sessions where we are going to be catching up on content and all that sort of stuff. But really for English, it's all about developing those skills, which is just practicing their essay writing, their imaginative writing, whatever else it may be. So I am definitely a hard quit just because of that work-life balance that we need to have.
Trying to maintain.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
No, that's very fair. Thank you. I'm a big quit on this one too. Although I think more so selfishly because my brain just doesn't work in the afternoon. Like once the bell rings, my brain is mush. No, but in
That's
saying
true.
that, you make an excellent point. Like the school bell rings and that's our time for do all the other admin things we didn't get a chance to do while we were teaching. And if it's eating into your after school time to be working on these things with your students, you might be wearing yourself a lot more thin. I think you make a great point. Be careful with online checking so that you're not spending all your evenings or all your weekends. I mean, sometimes it happens, particularly with our senior students, like our Year 12 HSC students. We want to make sure we're there for them, but also make sure that you're there for yourself, because if you burn out, it's not going to do anyone any good. But also I think there's so much time in the day as well to do these kinds of, analytical, I guess, workshopping. Like you can include that within your lessons. You can do lunchtimes, recess. I know both you and I occasionally, when there's a big assessment coming up, we'll say, listen, guys, these next 2-3 lunchtimes or whatever, we're going to be in our room if you have to ask us questions and whatnot. And also using the study sessions of your school. You know how when students start to drop 2 units, then they have those study periods in the day. I remember I had some really, really good kids that would, ask me, are there breaks in your timetable that happen to link up? And that way, if I really have burning questions, I can come down, have a quick chat. Because sometimes some kids do want that in-person thing, don't they? And sometimes I think, you and I, Adriel, like the in-person because we can verbally give that information and then it's up to the student to take it on board and turn it into something. Sometimes I find when I'm constantly doing feedback online, it's just a never-ending game. Like they might not take it on board, or there's always more left. So I think there's balance. I
think it's important. Like that balance is very, very important when it comes to marking, and especially like our younger teachers who are just starting off. We want to sort of change the world and we want to do everything for our students then and there, but make sure you take care of yourself or else you burn yourself out and then you fail to realize why you actually got into teaching in the first place. And that's probably important. So definitely staying after school for essay catch-up sessions is a hard quit for me.
Hard
Um,
no.
yeah,
Uh,
that's one that we're not sitting on the fence on.
No, I think so. I think so. But look, it'll be interesting. There might be teachers, there might be schools where that works, or the school has created kind of an after school program where they can tuck that in. And that's pretty cool as well. We can only kind of talk about our experience, can't we?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
little things that we
exactly.
hear from our friends and colleagues. But yeah, this is our opinion. So yeah, log on to the socials. We will put this up. We'd love to hear what you think, even if you just give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Yeah, just keen to see how you guys feel about that. All right, well, we
100%.
might get into the episode now, Adriel. So, as we mentioned when we started this ep, the focus is the conclusion now. This is like the more relaxed part of the process of essay
Yeah.
writing. And then though I think sometimes like because it's so relaxed, sometimes students just go, "Oh, whatever, like we'll just write something and it's kind of done." And
Mhm,
it is probably the easiest and quickest section, I think, when it comes to the
mm,
essay because you're kind of summing up everything you've kind of covered, but it does have to have some thoughts. So what we'll take you guys through today is a brief discussion on just what the purpose is, what we might encourage to include element wise to make it effective, some kind of pitfalls that we've seen along the way, and suggestions as well for maybe some strategies to make it more memorable, your conclusion, but also how to make sure that you've got that clarity and that impact. So
yeah.
that's what we're going to go through today, you guys. We might start with the first one then, Adriel. We're going to discuss now what is the purpose of the conclusion in an essay response.
Okay, awesome. So I think we start off with this idea that, remember, when you are getting your students to develop a strong conclusion, this can elevate your essay response to those band 5 and 6 band descriptors.
Mhm.
So it's very important to have a very strong conclusion. And what does that mean? Well, the conclusion here, look, it serves to consolidate your essay's argument. I think that's very important. It reinforces the thesis and leaves what we call a lasting impression
Mm.
on the reader, the marker, um, as per, I guess that voice that we're trying to have resonate through the body, and even the introduction of your essay is now summated in a nice manner, which just reinforces your argument. I think that's very important for us to look at. So for your higher end sort of responses, what we're looking for is an effective synthesis of some of those key ideas. And also, it should reflect how your essay has engaged critically with the module. I guess it's that summation, how it's responded to the question as well. And what it does, it demonstrates your insight, your sophisticated insight. Again, if we're looking at
Mm.
those higher band descriptors. So uh, look, we can probably go through like a few things here. If you're looking at, say, a sound response, how do we sort of distinguish the sound to the more sort of higher order things in
Mhm.
terms of our conclusion and what its purpose is? Well, remember, if you're looking at a sound conclusion, what you're generally going to see is the conclusion will generally describe your essay's content. So the student will probably go along, they'll describe, this is what's happened in my essay, the content, or they might have just a very simple explanation of the argument, but it's just a sound basic closure, and it doesn't really have those key links to the module descriptors or even the question. It's sort of just like oh, I think as you just mentioned in the introduction here, um, let's just quickly get this done because it's the final bit. All we have to do is
Mhm.
summarize it. But remember, you really do have to think about it. So if we start to look at the purpose at a higher level, your band 5 and 6 sort of responses will either analyze some of the key ideas, sustain that developed argument, but then they will effectively restate the thesis, and that aligns with
Mhm.
some of those module sort of descriptors again. And we keep talking about the module descriptors because remember, that's where your HSC question will arise out of. And
Yeah.
if you go one step further, if you're looking at some of those band 6 responses, remember these conclusions will either synthesize um, your argument together in that cohesive, coherent manner.
Yeah.
Again, has that alignment with the module concepts. And it doesn't, I guess I forgot to mention this as well. You're not introducing new ideas here. What you're doing
No.
is you're critically evaluating, how well your thesis has been demonstrated through the introduction and the body of your essay. So these are some of the things that hopefully we'll cover in the next few minutes here
Yeah.
in regards to what a good conclusion looks like, how we can develop
Mhm.
it. But I
Mhm.
guess the big thing here for us is when we're looking at the main purpose of a conclusion, it is to, as I mentioned there, it is to consolidate your argument, your essay's argument, and reinforce the thesis. Okay, and
Yeah.
have that lasting impression. I think those are the main things. So those are the
Yeah.
questions that you got to ask your students to look at straight away. It's like, well, your conclusion. How well have you consolidated your argument, reinforced the thesis, and left a lasting impression on your marker?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Just, when you were going through that, the words that did stand out to me was that consolidation, that synthesis, and that kind of that impact or that thoughtfulness or lasting impression. So that's wonderful because I mean, like you said, you can just kind of summarize it a little bit, but
Mm,
what we're trying to get our students to work up towards the higher bands. And so those were some great suggestions. Well, why don't we look at now then some of the elements? So if we were giving a basic kind of example of what types of things would go in our conclusion, what types of sentences we might have, where they might be arranged within the order of that conclusion. Yeah, let's look at that. How can we use elements to structure an effective conclusion?
So I guess like the first thing that we sort of mentioned here is making sure that we have a restatement of the thesis,
Yeah,
because remember you are consolidating your argument. I think this is
yeah,
very important. So again, as we're sort of looking at some of the descriptors here, we are looking at sort of the higher end things. So high end verbs, I should say, not things. This is where like if you've got a good conclusion and you're restating your thesis, you want your students to synthesize a thesis with a nuance. Okay, so
yeah,
they're using words like sophisticated, insightful, where we are critically evaluating how well the
yeah,
thesis has been
yeah.
demonstrated throughout the entirety of the response. So the restatement of the thesis is very, very important. That's my first step. Then the second thing is remember your summary of your key points. And these are the key points that you will have addressed in the body of your essay through your topic
Mhm,
sentences. You will have introduced this in your introduction. And again,
mhm.
not yesterday, sorry, last week we mentioned a thing about color coding in your body paragraphs, for example. Here's
Yeah,
another way you can sort of look at color coding. Well, how well
yeah,
have your ideas from your introduction aligned with the ideas that you are now summating in your conclusion, and get the kids to color code it. I mean, that's one of those
yeah,
teaching strategies that I would definitely have a look at.
yeah, that's
And then
awesome.
also, I think the last bit is just looking beyond their writing, making sure the students reflect. So they offer sort of like an idea, final thought
Yeah,
in regards to their thesis statement. So it's not just automated. It doesn't sound like it's mechanical. You've got that personal voice going through.
yeah,
And when we sort of mention this, we're not saying like, "Oh, I think that this is." You're not using the personal sort of voice here, but you're providing the marker with a reinforced sort of idea of why your thesis was important and
yeah,
why it was significant in the whole, reference to answering of the question. So
yeah,
it is, yeah. There's a few things there. So that if you're looking at it, those are my three main things: making sure you're restating the thesis, you're summarizing
mhm,
your key points, and then providing a final thought or reflection. And you
yeah,
probably noticed making sure that you are not introducing new ideas in your conclusion. That's
yeah.
significant.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's really, really helpful in terms of the sections and elements and what you can include. And if you're a school that's using the alarm matrix as your way to help organize your students in their writing, I think that final thought and reflection would be like the appreciation aspect of
Mm,
of that matrix. But we all want our kids to develop that appreciation. So if they can consider after they've gone like through, they've looked at their arguments, they've consolidated, they've synthesized, well, what does that make them appreciate about the text or the topic or whatever idea that question was introducing for them? They can appreciate, they're going to leave a lasting impression, aren't they? Because the
yeah,
appreciation
yeah,
is going to be really unique, um, and something
correct.
powerful and impactful for the marker to conclude. It's like, yeah, you've ended on that strong, like a bit of a bang as well. All right, that's
Yeah,
brilliant. Thank
yeah.
you.
I think
Well,
I think with that
yeah.
final part there, you've
Mm-hmm.
also got like this idea that what you're trying to do with that final thought, final reflection is getting your students to are you encouraging them, sorry, to reflect on some of those broader implications
Yeah,
or some of the questions that they might have in regards to
yeah,
their question. And this provides the scope for insightful sort of closure
yeah. I love
for
that.
the marker to think about. So
Mhm.
it's something that, as teachers and even students, we must consider when we are developing our conclusions.
Yeah, totally. It made me think last week when we were looking at the body, we're talking about like courtroom analogies. This is like your lawyer's kind of closing argument.
Yeah,
And if they, talk to your students, if they ever watch that stuff or look at kind of the, the stereotypes or the cliches, they
yeah,
always end on something thoughtful that yes, they've made their point.
yeah,
Yes, they've reinforced, their overall argument, but it leaves with that thoughtfulness so that the reader can or the
mm,
listener can take that on board and develop their own kind of thought process on it. So yeah, that's really cool.
yeah,
Well, they're the kind of key elements. You've summed them up really, really well, and you've offered some really good ideas too. What about then in terms of we want to look at now some common mistakes that students make in their conclusions? So what are some of the common pitfalls when writing them, and I guess how can students avoid them? I think the conclusion is something that I think students really need to consider them and think about it, because if they then see that what they have in their conclusion doesn't line up with the rest of their essay, then they know that there's something wrong in how sustained it is. Like, for
yeah,
example, I often find students will get to the point and they'll write their conclusion, and their conclusion is actually so clear and so to the point. And then you go
mm,
back to their intro, and their intro maybe is not as fine tuned, or the body kind of wiggled away. And it's like, oh, because you got to the end of your essay now, I say to my students, and you've worked out now at the end what you want to say, because you do have those students who some of them start off really strong, and some of them need to write or work their way into their essay until they get like their bearings. So I always
yeah,
think like the conclusion is everything that I'm saying in my conclusion perfectly matching up to what I had before that in my essay? And if it's not, I need to work back and tighten it all up. I find like
mm,
students
mm,
get that final clarity in the conclusion that perhaps they don't necessarily have in that intro when they start their essay.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's quite important there. Like it needs to be well aligned. It needs to be coherent. We
Yeah,
mentioned these sort of terms yesterday. It needs to
yeah,
be cohesive as well. Don't fall
yeah.
away from those terms when it comes to a conclusion. I think some of the big things that we look at in terms of having those effective and sophisticated
Yes.
uh, conclusions here is we've already mentioned this. Like we want to avoid some of that clarity. Sorry, avoid lacking some of that clarity or that critical
Yeah.
engagement in your conclusion because you sort of just got to it and you just want to finish your essay now. This is that
Yeah.
final argument. This is that lasting sort of impression that you're going to leave your marker
Yeah.
with. So making sure it's good is very, very important. We already
Yeah.
mentioned one of the big things here is you don't want to be introducing new ideas.
No.
Or unrelated points. So you'll often find this with your band 3 and 4 attempts where they'll generally be a bit sound in
Mm,
nature and they'll introduce some new
mhm.
ideas. However, in doing so, this sort of confuses the respondent. They're like, well, where did you mention this earlier on? Or where
Yeah.
was this through the body of
Yeah.
your response? So it's got no sort of clarity again, cohesion. Like those are the terms
Yeah.
again we would emphasize with our students. However, your band 5 and 6 sort of responses, these are where your students will avoid these new ideas and they'll focus on the
Yes.
thesis.
Yes.
They'll be able to consolidate it very fluently using some of those existing ideas that they've already mentioned
Yeah.
through the body of their paragraph, through their essay. So it's
Mhm.
more of a sophisticated synthesis of the ideas, and we'll generally see that strengthen their argument. And some of the things that you could sort of get your students to do, like I said, was color code your introduction and your conclusion, just to see whether the ideas align. So checking
It's
that
a great
alignment with the
idea.
thesis,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
is very, very important. I find conclusions can often be too vague as well. Um,
Yes.
and this is where students might just use very generic statements if you're in those band 3 to 4 range. essay
Yeah.
responses, whereas your band 5 and 6 responses will be, again, insightful and sophisticated in nature.
Yeah.
And they're often precise. I think that's probably the
Yeah.
word that we want to look at. They're precise, and precisely linked to the thesis statements which have been offered. So, what I would generally get my students to do is, get them to recognize or at least include one specific point from the essay,
Mhm.
that will help them guide their response, like just to provide that reflective sort of thought there. And that will help them to align themselves with what they have been speaking about through the body and even the introduction of their essay.
Yeah.
And then leading on from being too vague here, like you can be overly repetitive as well. We don't want our students to
Yeah.
fall into this trap.
And,
Um,
retell
yeah,
the parts of their evidence as opposed to the purpose of
yeah,
that.
yeah. So what they do is, instead of like providing some insight in terms of what they've spoken about or presented through the body of their essay, what they do is they, for your 3 and 4 responses, band 3 and 4 responses, they'll often just repeat the body paragraphs, verbatim.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that presents a sound summary, but it often becomes redundant. It's like, well, we've already heard this, but what is that emphasis? What is that oomph that you want? So your high end responses will generally paraphrase some of those key points,
Yes.
but they'll provide these key points in a paraphrased manner, uh, in order to, I guess, reframe the argument with fresh insight. I think that's
Mm.
probably the important thing. So
I
I
like
guess one of
that.
the
That's a
tips.
great tip, this idea of reframing. So you're not necessarily offering an entirely new point and idea, you're just offering a slightly more nuanced,
Yeah, it's
point
it's
or
your voice.
exploration of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the voice that we want to start to see, and
The
that's
voice.
sort of what stands
Mhm.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what stands out to our markers. And then, like we sort of said with that last question, the weak closing statements. I often see, like, I don't know, I'm not like a big fan of the in conclusion. I think
Mhm.
that this is like, I often don't like that in my essay responses, because
Mhm.
it's a bit cliched in terms of the
Mhm.
phrasing.
Mhm.
Whereas if you've got your higher order students here, you want to encourage them to use, clear closing. So, this argument effectively highlights
Yeah.
the relevance to blah blah, or um, if we're looking at like the impact, for example. So for your band 6 responses, the students are going to use impactful closing. So this argument insightfully underscores the text's, maybe enduring relevance, or critically affirms the module's intertextual values, or that's like that closing reflection, that statement that we want to see students, rather than in conclusion. I think that, this is a good
Mhm.
argument because you can see the difference already when you hear it, like when you
Definitely.
when you hear it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
again, that's probably
Absolutely.
probably another thing, like just reading it out aloud. But yeah, teach students to reframe those ideas. So, sorry, avoid new ideas and cliches while paraphrasing,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
guide them to synthesize ideas with precise module aligned reflections.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
And I think one way you can do that is, if you do have exemplars on hand, which look usually we do because we do have to keep the grade
Mm,
ranges for NESA and for if you get audited and all those kinds of things. So our HSC monitoring folders.
yeah,
You don't even have to necessarily show entire essays. Like even if you show a conclusion that's more of an A, and then a conclusion that's from a student who had a B response or a C or a D, and you kind of work that backwards. I think the students can visualize it a bit better, can sort of
yeah,
see the difference of, well, this is what I'm working towards, or this is maybe where I sit. This is what I'm trying to avoid. I love that idea of color coding because if you
mm,
got students to color code those really great elements, you would see that most of that conclusion would be color coded in a B. You would hope that all of it's color coded in an A. But when you look at
yeah,
your C or your D, it'd be missing a lot of sections.
yeah,
Yeah, so I think that's a really good strategy. Well, we started already talking about now our kind of fourth point question, which is we want to cover now what kinds of techniques or strategies students can use and teachers can help their students use to make their conclusions more memorable. And I think what you and I sort of are talking about here is when they're memorable, yes, but also getting them to that sophisticated conclusion, to that more
Mm,
original, sophisticated, thoughtful, insightful, because we are trying to push all our students up high in the ranges as much as we can. Yeah. So
mm, mm.
what are some things they can do to make sure it's memorable but also sophisticated?
Yeah. So important, remember, to connect back to the thesis. And I mean, if we were looking at some of the ideas that we've gathered from our discursive sort of essays as well, I think it's important to leave that lasting impression on your marker.
Yeah.
However, in this case,
Yeah.
rather than thinking about your thesis statement in an open-handed manner,
Mm,
you want your marker to engage with what you have presented through the body of your essay. And if we go back
yeah.
to like that courtroom analogy there, you want to leave your judge, who is your marker, with,
Yeah.
okay, this is a strong argument because of X, Y,
Yeah.
and Z that you have presented through your essay. So I
Yeah.
think it's very important for students to sort of look at this and note what they've sort of used as, we could call it, their hook in their introduction, for example, which is their thesis
Mhm.
statement.
Mhm.
Um, how well have they weaved that thesis
Yes.
statement and the topic sentences insightfully throughout their response, and then
Yeah.
you know how well can they weave it into their conclusion in order to not only
To
first of all
support.
answer the questions but support,
Mm.
support their argument. I think that's very, very important. um
Mhm.
we mentioned this term of like making a broader connection.
Yeah.
So life's relevance is quite important. And
Mhm.
often you can do this by getting the students to link these terms to the module themes and ideas. So getting them to have an
Yes.
understanding of the module descriptors. So
Yeah.
encourage them to connect with some of those contemporary issues or those universal truths which are often facilitated by the module.
Yeah.
Um, and this is something that you can, get them to brainstorm as part of their drafting process. I think that's quite
Mhm.
important
Because this is
because
where
it.
they conceptualize, right?
That's right. That's right. It
Mm.
allows them to sort of synthesize their ideas with a little bit of insight. That's that final sort of thought that we're leaving our marker with, that
Yeah.
final impression. And if they've got these sort of this conclusion, these impressions that, oh, actually, the student is thinking outside the box. The student is
Yeah.
actually engaging with the text.
Yeah.
That
Not
allows the
yeah.
response to stand out. I think that's,
Yeah.
yeah,
And not just like a literal engagement, or oh, there's the theme of jealousy, or the theme
yeah,
of love, but sort of, yes, that's true and that's there, but ultimately why, like what is that
mm,
representing to us as readers in terms of life experience, looking at those mimetic ideas. I
yeah,
think encouraging them to conceptualize also stops them from just going straight, well, here's the theme in the text, but when you've got those broader implications, you're becoming more insightful and you're conceptualizing. And I love that you use the word weave. I think that's
yeah,
so important, because we can't just do it in the conclusion, right? The conclusion is just reiterating that that's kind
yeah.
of what we've been addressing along the way.
Yeah, yeah. It's like what we call like a compact, bulletproof, airtight, air sealed
Hmm.
argument that you want
Hmm.
to leave your marker with, and that
Totally.
impression is very, very important. It's sort of that final thing. Remember, it's a final thing that your marker will read. So this is
Yeah.
what we see in the HSC as well. I mentioned this last episode as well. Get your students to start writing these things under time conditions. I think that's very, very
Hmm.
important because
Hmm.
what I've often seen is students will write a killer introduction, have really good body paragraphs, and then not finish their response. And it will drop their response from maybe that tracking towards that band 5 or 6 response into that band 4 range,
Hmm.
because you haven't addressed that final sort of component. You haven't left your marker with that final impression. They'll be like reading it, they're on edge, and then it's
Yeah.
like, oh no, like they just unfortunately haven't been able to finish this. And just to keep this into put this into perspective, remember your HSC markers are actually looking to give you marks.
Yeah.
We're looking to give you marks, but if you have not popped in the required components,
Then they
then
can't,
it's
right?
very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right.
You have to support
So
them to do that, right? Yeah.
that's right. That's right. So the
Mm.
more you write, the better it is. Like someone asked me the other day in my class, one of my students asked, "So what is it? Is it quality over quantity, or quantity over quality?" And I said, "Well, it has to be both, really. If you want to get those band 5s and 6s, it can't just
Yes.
be one or the other. You could write
Yes.
one quality introduction, but what do you expect to get in your essay? Like, you're
Yeah.
not going to get a good mark because you haven't provided enough meat for the marker to give you marks. So
Mm.
that's
Mhm.
very very important for us to consider. So timed writing conditions, are very very important, and that's something that you want to really encourage. Like, how can the students write these effective conclusions under those time conditions as well? So practice those
Mhm.
mini writing activities that will help them out. But yeah, those are a few things
Yeah.
that
No,
I
that's
would
really
say.
helpful. Yeah, that's really helpful. Because there's a lot, hopefully, like in the ideas that you're suggesting, you know, obviously, if we've got students listening, they might be reflecting, "Oh, I don't really even think about that when I'm doing my
Mm,
conclusion." And so, well, then, that's your starting point. So next time, if you do think about that, what is something maybe you can incorporate? And you might have teachers as well, because I know it's hard to, it's actually really hard to give feedback. Like, I
yeah,
think about,
yeah,
it takes a long time as a teacher to learn not only what you're roughly kind of looking for, but how to actually articulate that to their students. Like, because sometimes you
yeah,
just feel that something is lacking, but it might be hard to articulate what that is. So,
yeah.
or that they're doing something, there's something really impactful about what they're saying and doing. You're just not exactly sure yet why, particularly as new
Mm,
scheme teachers. It takes a, a,
mm,
a while to build that. But I think what you've
yeah,
suggested are some really great like points, kind of like a checklist of, as a teacher, if you're giving feedback on analytical writing and your students saying, "I want you to check and give me a feedback," then consider some of the great points that Adriel has made,
yeah.
because those might be points of feedback for your student as well.
Mm, mm.
Okay. So lastly then, we managed to talk over 30 minutes on just a conclusion. So
Yeah.
I know if anyone's, yeah, we say to you guys a lot, we talk a lot. We love to talk. This is like proof of this. But let's just do maybe our last one now to wrap up. So, what do we want our students to revise in their conclusions in order for them to have like clarity and impact? And maybe, Adriel, we can just talk about any final thoughts or ideas we had about conclusions. So yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the important things you just mentioned like just a minute ago, for teachers like myself as well, even though we've been teaching for a little bit longer now, and they're far more experienced teachers than us as well, and
Totally.
also some teachers that are coming into the profession as well.
Hmm.
One of the things that I found out is works well when you don't know how to give feedback is don't be afraid to get your students to go and ask your colleagues as well.
Yeah.
I'm often a very, very strong proponent of encouraging students to get multiplicity of voices when it comes to their drafts. It helps you out
Hmm.
as well because
Hmm.
your your colleagues will definitely provide insight that maybe you wouldn't have thought about as well in terms of feedback. So that's
Hmm.
something significant. Remember, you're all working as a team to get your students to the best place they can, whether it be a band four, a
Yeah.
three, a five, a six,
Yeah.
like whatever it might be. You're working as a team. It's a collective stuff room. So we're hoping to foster that in the English space. I think because often we can get caught up as teachers as well, thinking, "Oh, that's my student," or they're going to get this or they're going to get that, and it's going to be a reflection of me. Like I would throw that out the window and
Mm.
just really, really, work collectively. And I think that's very significant when it comes to giving feedback. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's probably a point I just wanted to just highlight there.
No,
But we're
I
looking
think
at
that's a great idea. Yep.
Yeah, I think if we're looking at this question here, how can students revise their conclusions, for that impact there? We've mentioned these things already. Remember,
Hmm.
review your response for alignment. Make sure that your essay is aligned with your thesis, top to bottom. I think that's very,
Hmm.
very important.
Yeah.
So
Top
it's
to bottom,
sustained.
back to front. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You can backward map it. You can look, well, these are the ideas I'm in my conclusion. Have I spoken about this through the body? If I haven't, get rid of them in your conclusion. And in the
Yeah.
same way, in your introduction. So those are some key things. Make sure your thesis aligns throughout the entirety of the response. And that's reflected through your conclusion there. Seek feedback. Um, Feedback is very, very important. And like I just mentioned there in that little spiel there, feedback from a variety of voices. I think that's very, very
Hmm.
important.
I
Get them
think so
to
too.
get other teachers to read it and say, "Hey, do you think this is aligned well?"
Yeah.
It's another one. Again, with assessments, just be careful getting students to do the peer reviews. And if they're in
Yeah.
class activities, that's fair enough. But just assessment tasks, we want to avoid collusion, and that can often happen if students are
Yeah.
giving peer feedback. So teacher
Yeah.
feedback is quite important here.
Yeah.
Um,
And
and yeah,
multiple teachers. So I always encourage my guys, you don't have to just, if I'm teaching advanced, is there another teacher teaching advanced? And then what other teachers in the staff room can
yeah,
read your
that's right.
response and just give you a more new, renewed, and fresh perspective. Because, let's be honest, sometimes marking and feedback can be quite subjective.
Yeah,
All of us can only comment on what we know,
yeah,
so that's where I think you made a great point. Engage all the other people that have different experience around you and kind of work together that way. And then the student will have lots of multiple perspectives to work with.
yeah, 100%, 100%. And it's like it takes a village, doesn't it, to raise? I guess they say that
Yeah.
analogy there, and
I mean,
that's what we want to be
that's
looking
a
at.
great analogy because when you think about it, I mean, very, very rarely is the class that we have in year 12 the same class we had all the way up from year 7.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's so, so rare. Like, usually they're getting different teachers, different years. They might
yeah,
be kids you've taught before. They might be kids you've never taught before. So it just seems a bit strange to me. Like, why would we kind of just hold on to them and coddle them when there
yeah,
might be other people who can give us even pointers on what's worked with them in the past or what they could suggest or what they think. Yeah, I love that
yeah,
idea of we're all like a little village,
yeah,
a little English village.
yeah. Yeah,
Mm,
100%, 100%. So very, very important for us to consider there. Last few things there. Make sure you read your work aloud. We've been speaking this into all of our steps, really. Reading out your work out
mm,
aloud because it just helps with your flow. It allows you guys to hear the clarity
yeah,
of your response and whether you've left that lasting impression or not.
yeah.
And then check the length. Remember, you don't want your response to be over your conclusion to be too long or too short. It needs to be a
Mhm,
nice sort of in between
mhm,
line here. I sort of
mhm.
say, like, for a HSC sort of response, your students are probably looking anywhere from about 1,000 words to 1,200 words for their
Mhm,
response, which is,
mhm.
I don't know, about 4 to 5 written pages, depending on the size of their handwriting.
Yes.
But yeah, check the length of your conclusions because if you've got that sort of word range, you've probably got about 150 to 200 words for your introduction,
Yeah.
about 250 to 300 words each for maybe if you've got the 3 body paragraph approach there, and then about
Yeah.
100 to 150 words for your conclusion. So maybe 150 or so. I think 100 words is probably too short. So
Mhm.
you're looking at, yeah, making sure that the ranges are pretty good. So just word length, all that sort of stuff, very, very significant. There's so much more we can speak about, but we've spoken, I guess, with a few main things.
I think so. And I think this is why we sort of wanted to do this series in parters, because we can talk about the essay holistically, but there's also benefit because you might have, like, I find my different students need different things, right? So some of them might be really great at intros, but then their body lacks, or their bodies might be
Mm,
great, but the intro or the conclusion. So I think it's really important to delve in and look at them in separate sections because they do require slightly different things.
yeah,
Yeah, but I think the suggestions that we've made and things that we've discussed about our own teaching experience, because let's be honest here, the classroom teachers are the front lines of this stuff, right? So,
mm,
I
mm,
mean, we do have, people at NESA and all that, organizing things, creating things, and marking and all that. But you are the one that, you're the ones that are spending all this time with your students and you're that direct guidance and focus. So I know that I always want to make sure that I have as much suggestions as possible, if I
yeah,
can, to give to a student, just so that they're aware of all the possibilities. Sometimes they take on all that feedback, sometimes they don't. But let's just
mm,
say it also, I think, covers your back a little bit. We know
yeah,
that different schools, different systems, different stakeholders, different
yeah,
families. If you're giving this clear feedback and making some suggestions, then the student has that, and you're kind of
mm,
covered by that, and what they do with it is what they do with it.
mm, mm,
Yeah.
mm. Yeah. And I think like
There's-
the final sort of thing,
yeah.
if we go back to like our little quick question there, remember, you're not writing these essays. You tell the
Yeah.
students, I often say, well, I've sat my
Yeah.
HSC over
Yeah.
15 years ago now. But
Yeah.
we've already done our part when it comes to our study. It's up to you
Yeah.
guys now to write things. So feedback is about suggestions. It's about allowing the students or giving them direction
Yes.
in each of these stages, and they have to go off and work on this. And if your students
Yeah.
listening, this is probably the important thing as well. We're not doing
Yeah.
this to torture you. We're doing this
No.
because in the HSC, we're not going to be there holding your hand in order
Yeah.
to write these responses. You're going to have to go through your
Yeah.
processes, and this teaches
Yeah.
you how to sort of stand on your own 2 feet.
I agree. And I think this is where in year 7, 8, and 9, we can be really explicit. We can hold their hand a lot and we can help them edit kind of a lot, especially like, in that early stage. But then once they start getting their feet, we don't want to be overly hand holding in year 10, 11, 12, because like you
Yeah,
said, when it comes to that HSC, it doesn't. So we want to build the skills along the way as much as we can. And then I think when they're in 11 and 12, we're consolidating, we're fine
yeah,
tuning. I know
yeah.
that's not always reality. We've all worked in different schools with different students, and
Mm,
different
mm,
situations. But I think as just keeping that in mind as much as you can to introduce this stuff in those junior years where you've got more time and the stakes are not as high. Because once they're in year 10, 11, 12, the stakes are a lot higher. Yes, I think that's some really good
yeah.
things that you've left for consideration as well, Adriel. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
All right. Well, I think that brings us then to the end of our conclusions, part of our analytical essay segments. So we really hope that we've just been able to give you some insights into how to help your students craft not only effective conclusions, but hopefully, insightful and conceptual
Mm,
ones. That are really going to strengthen not only their results, but their understanding. I think we come
yeah,
back to it. That's why we do this. We want them to engage with literature and with writing to feel a sense of empowerment and a sense of knowledge and a sense of understanding. So just remember then when we're looking at these strong conclusions, we want them to tie back to that entire essay, leave that lasting impression, and hopefully leaving that student feel confident that they've learnt something through that process as well.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, if you've been enjoying our episodes, please, as always, like, subscribe, and share. We'd love to, we're enjoying what we're doing, Adriel and I. We'd love to keep going, but we really need to, have everyone on board if we can, and just we'd love to hear from you. That's the thing. Comment, engage, email, offer us suggestions on what kind of episodes you like. We've got Adriel and I a few ideas moving forward, but we'd really love to engage with other teachers that are in the midst of it now, and yeah, just engage with us on the socials. And thank you so much for continuing to listen to us. I think we're on episode 22 now, and it's been
Yeah.
fantastic. And here's to many more.
100%, 100%.
Yeah,
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
thank you.